Nearly 50 years after the King of Rock and Roll's death, his Graceland attic, a place sealed off since 1977, was finally opened. What was inside wasn't just Elvis's personal belongings, but something far more haunting. A leather jacket carried a cryptic message: "Wear this when you need to disappear." And the tapes? They held a version of Elvis we've never heard before. Could these discoveries completely rewrite what we thought we knew about his final years? And what might they tell us about a side of Elvis he never shared with the world? When the attic at Graceland was finally opened, it felt like stepping into a carefully guarded secret. For nearly 5 decades, this room remained untouched, its contents shielded from the world like a time capsule meant to stay sealed forever.
Most times he showed you that he cared.
He was the most generous, the most beautiful, inside and out human being you ever want to meet.
You know what happened to Elvis? Let me give you a classic example of fans literally can cause you a lot of problems and they don't mean to. They accepted him the way he was.
Played the record, and we thought it was really good, and at the end he said Elvis Presley, and it just, it really shocked us. And he played it like 7 or 8 times in a row.
I think it would have destroyed his whole world. It would have ended a lot quicker.
He was afraid of that last year.
Had he known he was going to Europe, Billy, I promise you, let me tell you something, had he known he was going to Europe.
They locked the door in 1977, the same year Elvis Presley passed away. And for years, nobody set foot inside. Those who visited or worked at Graceland could only wonder what lay beyond those walls. It wasn't a place for guided tours or photo ops. It was something else entirely. It became a symbol of mystery, a room that almost seemed frozen in time. The moment the door creaked open, the sense of anticipation was nearly overwhelming. At first glance, it didn't seem extraordinary. Rows of neatly packed boxes, dust-covered trunks, and shelves lined with personal belongings. But as each item emerged, it became clear that this was more than just an attic. It was Elvis's attic, and everything inside told its own story. Tucked among the storage were handwritten song lyrics, some scribbled on scraps of paper, enriched with incomplete musings and stray thoughts. You could see his process in those pages, his constant tinkering, his perfectionism, his need to pour himself onto the page before bringing his music to life. Fan letters were tucked into an old wooden box, still sealed in their envelopes. Many were heartbreakingly sincere, with messages from admirers begging him to take a break, to look after his health, and be kind to himself. It was a window into how deeply his fans cared, but also a reminder of the toll his fame had taken. Among them, there were also unopened letters, words Elvis had never read, thoughts he had never responded to. Some felt so raw and personal that they seemed almost out of place, too intimate to exist. But these weren't the only glimpses of his personal life preserved here. His stage outfits, carefully hung and covered, sat waiting in perfect condition, each one carrying memories of the spotlight and the screaming crowds. Next to them sat his mother's Bible, its edges worn from years of use, its pages filled with underlined passages and personal notes. And then there was the teddy bear, a small, frayed toy that must have held immense sentimental value. It wasn't hard to imagine Elvis holding on to it during moments of quiet, a connection to something simpler, something comforting amid the chaos of his life. And almost as if to heighten the attic's mystery, a leather jacket lay folded on a shelf. It looked like it had been worn frequently, the leather soft and faded. Tucked into one of its pockets was a note, a short, cryptic message handwritten on aged paper. "Wear this when you need to disappear," it read. The words themselves sparked more questions than answers. Was it something Elvis had written to himself? Was it a joke, a passing thought, or a reference to something far deeper? It's impossible to know, but the note now seemed like a clue, a tiny piece of a much bigger story hidden among the attic's relics. To understand these items better, you also have to consider Elvis's state of mind during his final years. By the mid-1970s, his health was declining rapidly. His once legendary energy was sapped by long tours, grueling schedules, and worsening health problems. Much of the blame would later be aimed at Dr. George Nicopolis, the physician who wrote Elvis thousands of questionable prescriptions for painkillers and sedatives. But the problem went deeper than a single doctor. Elvis was trapped in the machinery of fame and expectation, and these substances became both his relief and his prison. It's no wonder so many believe the attic was his way of holding on to something real, something he could protect from all the pressures closing in. So, was this more than just an attic filled with keepsakes? It feels deliberate, doesn't it? So many of these items were profoundly personal, pieces of Elvis's life that were never meant for an audience. In a way, it almost seems like he was curating them, not for public display, but for himself. And perhaps, just maybe, for a future where his truth might be understood on his own terms. It's here that you can start to wonder, was this room an escape, a sanctuary, or a preservation of his own story? And what story was Elvis trying to tell? Among these discoveries lies something even more compelling. Tucked away beneath the memorabilia was something extraordinary, a collection of tapes, reel-to-reel recordings, left untouched since 1976. The tapes didn't just capture music, they uncovered a side of Elvis almost no one had seen or heard. They held questions, too. Questions that might finally shine a light on his final days and what he envisioned for his future. At first, the tapes seemed almost out of place. Sitting among Elvis's personal belongings in the attic, these old reel-to-reel recordings could have been overlooked as just another relic from his career. But these weren't ordinary studio recordings, nor were they polished performances crafted for the public. These tapes, untouched since 1976, offered something far more intimate, raw sessions of a man at his most vulnerable, experimenting in ways nobody could have imagined. The contents of the tapes tell an entirely different story than the Elvis Presley most of the world remembers. They capture moments that feel almost private, as if we're eavesdropping on something never meant for an audience. In these recordings, you hear Elvis exploring gospel hymns with stripped-down arrangements, his voice quieter than usual, yet filled with a sense of searching. In places, the recording picks up the faint hum of early synthesizer sounds, sounds that suggest he was curious about moving in a completely new musical direction. Then, there are moments where blues riffs echo, drawing Elvis back to his roots, as if he were reconnecting with where it all began. These aren't rehearsals meant to refine songs for an album or performance. There's something else. They feel deeply personal, like a form of expression he rarely allowed himself. But among all of these moments, there's one recording that stands out, his version of Unchained Melody. It's not the dramatic, orchestral version fans might remember from other performances. This one is different. It's quiet. It's almost threadbare, just his voice, unaccompanied. You can hear the depth of emotion in every note. Elvis's voice cracks in places, trembling slightly as he sings, and the pauses between phrases seem deliberate, as if he's letting the haunting melody speak for itself. The entire thing feels less like a rehearsal and more like a final message, a farewell wrapped in song. Knowing this was recorded only months before his death adds a layer of meaning that's hard to ignore. It's not polished or perfect, but that's what makes it so haunting. It's raw, unapologetically human. Listening to it is like hearing the king of rock and roll wrestle with something larger than music. These recordings are a stark departure from the commercial sound that defined his career. They reveal a side of Elvis that was rarely seen, a man not bound by the expectations of his audience, the charts, or the industry. Without the backing of a studio, producers, or marketing teams, what's left is the artist himself experimenting freely. These tapes allow a glimpse into what might have been if he'd had the space to explore more freely in his final years. They show an Elvis who was more introspective, possibly even reflective of his own future, something that commercial releases rarely showed. Then there's the question of why these recordings were left behind. They weren't carefully archived or filed away in RCA's vault. Instead, they were tucked into this attic, alongside his most personal items. Could they have been left there on purpose? Were they meant to be found one day? Or were they forgotten and abandoned as just another chapter he didn't have time to finish? Together with the other discoveries from the attic, these tapes begin to present a portrait of someone grappling with his own legacy and mortality. Was this Elvis's way of making peace with his life? Or perhaps it was a way for him to reflect on everything that had passed, free from the expectations that came from being Elvis Presley, the icon. And of course, the cryptic leather jacket note hangs over all of this. Wear this when you need to disappear. Was it a coincidence that the tapes were found alongside this strange message? Or was the note pointing to something deeper? A plan, perhaps? Or at least the idea of escape? The combination of the tapes and the note almost seems to suggest that he might have been planning something, even if it wasn't fully formulated. Was he trying to say goodbye? Was he leaving behind hints for us to piece together all these years later? Or was it something more practical? A private man protecting his personal moments from public scrutiny? The tapes raise more questions than answers, but that's precisely why they're so compelling. They act as the heart of this attic's discovery, revealing an Elvis no one expected to find. Together with the other belongings, they challenge the way we think about him. As a man, an artist, and someone whose struggles played out on the world's largest stage. But more than that, they force us to ask whether we ever truly knew him at all. Could the attic and its contents finally rewrite the story of his life and death? These recordings might not tell us everything, but they shine a light on the places he kept hidden, and maybe, just maybe, they were meant to do exactly that. The attic felt like more than a collection of belongings. It seemed personal, intentional, even like a message left behind. Could Elvis have known this sealed room would someday reveal the truth he couldn't share in his lifetime? The tapes, his mother's Bible, the cryptic leather jacket note. These weren't random keepsakes, but pieces of a puzzle only time could assemble. Was he retreating into privacy, preparing to escape, or crafting his legacy in secret? Elvis was more than a performer. He was a man consumed by fame's burden. What does this attic tell us about his struggle to be understood?